We are seeing, Dan, continued strikes on the Gulf. Dubai has intercepted missiles causing debris to injure certain individuals on the ground. However, this, of course, comes as Donald Trump is touting an early exit strategy. What that strategy might be is unclear, whether that is a deal or something else. It is unconfirmed. But reports are emerging that Arab allies like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the UAE, where we saw these strikes intercepted, are wanting the conflict to continue until there is regime change or behavior from Iran changes. Now, this comes in sharp contrast to those countries who wanted Donald Trump not to take action against Iran at the height of those protests that we saw at the start of the year. Why have we gotten these reports come in?
The Gulf countries always had a dualistic view about Iran. On one hand, they're not eager for conflict because they knew very well it could embroil them and entail short to midterm losses. On the other hand, they have increasingly lost patience with Iran's potential for misbehavior, and at this point, it's actual damage that it is causing. And they have concluded that the chances of Iran altering its aggressive stance towards the region, not to mention towards its own citizens, is less than the chance that a regime change effort can succeed, which is interesting because a regime change effort is unlikely to succeed merely by aerial bombardment. So when these countries observing that the Iranian regime does not appear to have in its DNA the capacity of surrender, essentially because there is a strong suicidal bent and they are jihadist fanatics. They are willing to risk a prolonged conflict that could cause long-term damage, and that just shows you how desperate things have become and how totally they've concluded that the Iranian regime must go. And we saw this in the UAE ambassador's statements, including in an op-ed to the Wall Street Journal a few days ago, essentially calling for regime change. And since he must know that this is not easily done, this means they're preparing for a longer conflict. How to achieve regime change is an interesting question that we can explore as well.
But Dan, a red line when it comes to these Gulf states. We've seen turmoil across the majority of them. Kuwait, Bahrain, UAE, we've seen explosions and damage, civilian deaths and injuries throughout all of these countries. Is there going to be a red line when there's going to be direct involvement for them, do you think, or are they very much set on letting the Americans and the Israelis handle their defenses?
I am not sure that direct involvement is going to move the needle that much beyond symbolically. But perhaps. Right now, part of the reason why the war is unpopular, and one of the reasons why Trump, I still think, is considering an off-ramp, if an elegant one can be devised, is that America is completely alone. And this is odd because, for example, the refusal of NATO countries to very much cooperate with the American effort is a known goal. They themselves suffer, A, from the existence of the Iranian regime and the threats that it produces, and B, currently, from the Iranian regime's actions in the Persian Gulf and the blocking of the Strait of Hormuz. You'd think they would want to help. But the broader geopolitical reality is that Trump has been insulting and sneering at his NATO allies and even threatening one of them, Denmark, with invasion a few months ago for over a year. And they're just incredibly upset with him. They have little appetite for getting involved in a war he started without consulting with them. And in general, I think they sort of enjoy seeing him twisting in the wind. But it could backfire upon them because if the war really lasts a long time, then the economic fallout will be severe, and even in places that are far away, like Britain and France.
At what point does this war stop being a security issue and become a full-blown economic crisis, if that's not what it already is?
I have to agree with your implication. That is absolutely what it already is, and it could be even worse. Look, the GCC countries, their total annual GDP is almost $2.5 trillion. Every one of us could, tighten our belt by 10%. It's not a great outcome, but it's survivable. It's not desirable. These are bizarre countries, many of them where the majority of the population is actually not citizens, and the GDP calculations can be a little bit distorted. The bottom line is there's going to be economic suffering for as long as the Persian Gulf is A, menaced by missiles and drones flying in all directions, and B, has its flow of oil and other cargo impeded. That's just very clear. But whether this will make the countries in question pressure the U.S. to stop, as I believe was probably the regime's calculation, or the opposite, make them lose patience completely and be willing to really sacrifice, in a way that I believe the Israelis actually are, to get rid of the regime is very much an open question. And the signs are that it could be the latter. So in that regard, the regime might have miscalculated.
Borzu, I want to come to you once again. Reports suggesting that millions of jobs here could disappear. Is in the region that's struggling with youth unemployment already, how damaging will this even month of conflict be for the region in general?
Look, it's not really about the region. I think the greater impact of this conflict will be felt in countries like Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand, Latin America, etc. But I want to say that this is the consequence, in a way, the ironic consequence of sanctioning Iran for 30, 40 years. Iran is not part of the global economy. It's not part of the SWIFT banking system. It doesn't have any connection to, there's no official Nike store in Tehran. There's no Shell gas stations. So in a way, they're in a position where they can afford to really, really damage the global economy and create a lot of pain for the whole entire world because as a punishment for this war. So I don't know if it's going to work. I don't know if it's going to mobilize the world against it. But at this point, if you look at the polling numbers, even in the United States, people are blaming the U.S. for the war, and people are sympathizing wildly with Iran and the Iranian position. So I don't know how bad of a strategy, as Dan was saying, this could be. For now, it seems Iran is content to just damage the world economy from which it has been excluded as a way of pressuring both the U.S. and the West to change their calculations.
It's clearly true.
Dan, do you want to weigh in on this?
No, I mean, Boris is right. That's their calculation. I would merely add that to a degree, not fully, but to a considerable degree, the Iranian regime has the advantage of not being a democracy. They don't really have to worry about what the polls say. Boris speaks of how some people may have fallen for the little trick of becoming nationalistic and therefore supporting the regime that oppresses them. Surely, in some cases, yes. But is that a real mass movement to favor the regime? I am extremely skeptical. This regime is widely detested. And whereas I wouldn't say that there's wild support for Iran's position in the war as such, there is lack of support for America going to war. So the American position is a little bit dualistic. I saw a poll that came out just in recent days looking at the American Jewish community, and they too are mostly against the war for all the reasons one can imagine. But at the same time, they are overwhelmingly against the regime. And it's not because they're Jewish. You speak to Iranian expats, they are overwhelmingly against the regime. So I would say the entire world is in a bit of a bind here what to do with a regime that's wildly opposed by rare global consensus that certainly includes the Iranian people, but might not include their fellow travelers in the dictatorships of Russia, China, and North Korea. But there's no easy way to dislodge them, and this is the real enormous challenge. And whereas we can try to sort of handicap which stratagem worked better, and maybe the Iranians really calculated correctly, the outcome where the regime feels it's victorious in this regard could be very grim for the Iranian people in particular.
Okay, I want to thank my guests very much, Borzu Daragahi and Dan Perry. Pleasure to have you both and speak to you on those issues.